Welcome to the Demanding Value podcast. I'm here today with Meena Medler, who is a former customer of mine and became a friend of mine when we worked together when she was at her role in Northwestern. So Meena started off as a physician assistant. So she has that clinical background. And then she moved into the director of procurement at Northwestern. And by the way, Northwestern was ranked in the top 25 of Gartner's top supply chain departments in the United States. So a very, very, very well-reputed and well-run supply chain department. So from there, Meena moved over to Premier. Premier is the largest group purchasing organization in the United States, and she is now the vice president of strategic supplier engagement. So I'm having Meena on as our inaugural guest because she encompasses everything. So she encompasses the clinical background. She encompasses value analysis and supply chain directly at the hospital level, and now she's at the GPO level, and she can really speak to that engagement between the hospital and GPO and the vendors, and what are the hospitals and GPOs truly looking for from vendors in order to quantify value. So Meena, truly you are, not only because you're a friend, but you're a perfect guest to start this off, because really what the Demanding Value podcast is all about understanding and dissecting both sides of the buyer-seller process to make sure that value is truly maximized. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning, Gary. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me as a guest on your podcast. And I look forward to a great conversation because I think there's so much that has changed. And as you said, right, as a clinician, here I am coming in a totally different world of supply chain. So I'm going to start out with a question. Ask me how, in the craziness of this journey, did I end up at Premier?
I'd love to know.
I think of it as so believe it or not, in my world, I was going to be a clinician all my life, right? There was nothing that I ever thought. I loved heart and vascular, spent 20 plus years being a physician assistant, but I've done a lot of things, research. I have been involved in accreditations, but while practicing as a physician assistant at various institutions from Henry Ford to University of Florida, Rush, and most recently Northwestern Health System. But it was always evolving as data evolved, quality metrics came into place. It was always about changing and evolving metrics, measurement. So I was always asked to try something different. And my personality was, I don't ever want to say what if, so I'm going to go try it out. So when I had the opportunity to become an administrator of heart and vascular, learn from Cleveland Clinic how they measure 270 metrics in improving quality and outcomes around patient care, that was one of the things that I've learned to do those dashboards. And so then came wanting to be heart failure PA at Northwestern, but then one of my former friends and actually former mentor, boss, and a friend, Susan Campbell, who is actually at Kaufman and Hall right now as a senior vice president, she said, you know, I really want you to help me build programs and operations at Bloom Cardiovascular Institute. So there goes being a PA, transitioning for the first time 100% into a clinical operational world. And later on, I had the opportunity from my former, again, boss, Gary Fennessy at Northwestern, who said we could use some of your expertise and things that you've done to come and build value analysis program at Northwestern as Northwestern was growing. And then really at that point, thought I was done with supply chain, was going to go back onto clinical or operational side until Premier, which is a healthcare transformative entity, basically came to me and said, we are really invested in value-based contracting. We're looking to transform the way we procure. Would you be interested in joining? And it was a great opportunity, a great organization. So that's been my journey. So yes. None of my 5-year plans of wanting to become a VP of Heart and Vascular Service Line was my dream, right? So that was my dream. And then from that perspective, I veered, but I've enjoyed every minute of it, So
awesome.
That's how I'm here working with you, getting a chance to meet someone like you and becoming a friend in long term. So wouldn't have happened if I didn't take those turns throughout my journey.
That's great. It sounds like you really trusted your instincts and really everything happens for a reason. So it sounds like it's been a great path.
More mentors, more mentors. I was nervous. I have to give it to some of my physician and my mentors, Susan Campbell and Eric Conley. There are 3 or 4 of them that are still I go to this day. And Dr. Davidson, who said, take an opportunity, you'll become stronger in learning. You'll have that holistic approach. And they all know that I like to learn. So it was a great opportunity for me to keep
one
moving.
thing, and we didn't talk about this prior to pressing the record button, but I know that you're a mentor to other people now as well. So the fact that you just detailed your journey and gave credit to your mentors and you're paying it forward now by mentoring other people is really, that speaks to who you are as a person. So it's really great.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah. So you mentioned, so I have my list of questions, but you did just mention that Premier is focusing on value-based contracting. So I want to understand definitely what that means to Premier in particular. But maybe just can you start with what is Premier? What is a group purchasing organization? How should vendors really look to that? I think a lot of vendors certainly understand Premier and what they are, but do they really understand it? Do they really understand how it can help them grow their business? So can you give a little summary there?
Yeah. Absolutely. Group purchasing organization, as you said, I want to kind of take a step back and talk about it from the perspective of traditional, right? Even supply chain healthcare has transformed significantly in the past 2 decades. Historically, supply chain was a materials management. It was procurement. It's you had a product, a right price contract, you procured it for from services to solutions to products, and you provided that product for clinicians and across the health system. That was one component of it, very transactional, right? There was nothing more to that. And also that's why I sort of talked about the evolution of, why are people like me in this arena learning and enjoying this aspect base? Because I think a GPO supported that. It had economies of scale. Premier, one of the largest GPOs in the United States, 4,100 plus hospitals. And we have economies of scale working with suppliers, creating efficiency, right? So you don't have to negotiate every single product contract at each hospital level, creating that efficiency. Through that also getting the best price, for our members so that they don't have to go seek that out, and being able to bring that component back, right? So it's in that economies of scale, efficiency, evaluation, vetting the products, vetting the suppliers, making sure all the front end of the work so it's not redundant. So it creates that efficiency, both from time, value, proposition, and relationships perspective, and bringing the new technology in that manner. So I think that was one aspect of GPO. I would say it has evolved tremendously. Policies changing, healthcare is going from fee for service to more continuum of care, and we're looking at value-based care, which we can talk a little bit about later. But from a GPO perspective, one of the things that we talked about is all types of efficiency, data, technology, as well as clinical outcomes, practice optimization, service line optimization, financial optimization. There's so many aspects to it. The beauty with Premier is that we have been either evolving in the sense we either created internally because of our diversity of experience that we have within the company, inclusive of supply chain experts, clinicians, technology experts, advisory services, right? So we have a 3-pronged approach of looking at it. So a GPO has evolved into more of a healthcare transformative entity that brings all the stakeholders together. We are situated in a way that we have the best relationship with our members as well as our suppliers. We are looking at both of them. They're both our customers. They're both our stakeholders. And we look and align with both of their goals. And we've been evolving to ensure that we're bringing that value back to all of those entities that are involved in our decision.
Got it. Okay. So from a vendor's point of view, if they get on the Premier contract, then they don't have to go out and negotiate with thousands of hospitals. They really have one negotiated agreement with Premier, and then access to those Premier members that want to take part in their technology. Is that fair?
That is essentially, the premises of it. It doesn't mean that there aren't always areas where some of the larger entities are looking for some local different way of doing business with them, but overarching, the terms and conditions are set. There are price tiers that are set as well. And I think there is that level of efficiency. Again, if we get away from the transactional, look at the holistic value, that is absolutely the purpose of it. And you can, eliminate all of that additional activity that may have to happen at a local level.
Got it. Okay, so you started off talking about value-based contracting. So let's start simple there. What is that?
Okay. So again, we talked about traditional transactional activity. Supplier comes in, they have products, they establish a price, we enter into an agreement, terms and conditions are set, everything is set for the set term of the time of the contract. If we really talk about value-based contracting, every supplier comes in with a certain value proposition in the sense that their product has a certain outcome or solution that differentiates them from their competitors. And that's how they pretty much present or market their product. One of the things we're asking is, go one step further. Are you going to guarantee that outcome? Are you going to enter into a partnership? Can we get away from the transactional component and become those strategic partners that are vested in the best interest of our mutual customer, which is the patient? So all of our suppliers' missions, if we look at it, there's a commonality. We're all here to improve healthcare.
Yeah.
If that is our mission and goal, and if we're aligned in it, if you have the data and the evidence to back it up, why don't we associate a risk? It's a mutual risk. There is a cost to conversion. There's a cost to procurement from a hospital side perspective. So in this way, how can we extend it one further and be the true partner to a hospital and collectively improve outcomes? So that's the premises of value-based contracting. We're sharing between two entities.
Got it. So risk share has been, that's like the golden child, right? I mean, that's been discussed for years and years. And it seems like what you're saying is we're there now. So it's my understanding from that concept, though, is it's very, very hard that everyone wants to enter into a risk share agreement, or a lot of people do. But then how do you determine if it was the product that caused the positive outcome or the negative outcome versus, was it something else, and who's held accountable to that within that risk share? How do you navigate that?
It's a great question, Gary. And I think when we look at our members, 95% of our hospitals really want to enter into these kind of agreements, right? That's the evolution, going from value analysis, evaluating the quality of products, making sure that the outcomes are measured, there's data to support it, to evolution of, okay, now we know that this is a high quality product, but can we really measure it? There's the research component of it, but there's evidence, but does it happen in real life, right? So I think one of the things is data. Data is the key, right? Measurements, metrics. So data is one component, and clinical practice standardization. You cannot tell anything unless you have consistent methodology with you deliver care. So that's the clinical transformation component of it, right? We are trying to say, let's provide the best product with the best evidence-based clinical practice and measure outcomes. It can't go one without the other. And that's where I think, again, when I talk about Premier being a healthcare transformational GPO, unique and a differentiator, is we have the capability with our technology. We know what metrics are there. We know what data is there. We can come in and support through our quality advisor, service line analytics type of tools. We already have an embedded value analysis process when we vet the product. So we have an extensive sourcing methodology with which we have clinical councils, member councils. We present all kinds of data, transparency, and that's how we create these contracts. And then you extend that out to those unique suppliers that want to go one step further in that journey and say, here is a contract, you vetted, there's evidence. Now we can come in and utilize our tools and our technologies and be able to provide that measurement And then also we have clinical operational leadership. Our advisory services has clinical operational experts that can come in and implement. So you can say, why should members do that? It's because members, hospitals have competing priorities. We're constantly reacting to something or the other. We've just seen it with COVID-19. This is about partnership. How do we accelerate the best outcomes for our patients? It's taking the expertise from, whether it's from a supplier perspective, whether it's from your GPO, and support it with existing initiatives within a hospital and work collectively together to accelerate the best outcome. And that's the purpose of value-based contracting. It isn't to say that the hospitals by themselves can't do it, suppliers can't partner directly with hospitals, but GPO is the conduit. We have the capability to meet our members where they are. So if they just need the contract agreement completed by us, we have that capability. If they need tools, we have that capability along with the agreement. If they want all of it completed by us, we have that capability as well. And that's where we as Premier are a differentiator in the market.
Got it. Okay, so that's huge because, I mean, I've dealt with some of the largest health systems and they don't even have access to the data necessary all the time to manage a risk share agreement. So to make sure I'm really understanding that. So if a vendor has compelling evidence, they're willing to stand behind it, they're motivated to enter into a risk share agreement, and let's say they're dealing with a, moderate sized community-based hospital that just doesn't have the data capabilities to track, let's just say it's a product that claims to reduce surgical site infection. They don't have the data capabilities to be able to say at the end of the contract, did the product live up to expectations or not? If they're a Premier customer or not, and they want to leverage they want to join Premier, can that hospital say, hey, Premier, can you help us to manage this risk share, bring in your tools so we will have access to that data? Does it get to that? Is that how this kind of works?
I think the data is already there, right? I think it's electronic medical record systems, but we have the tools to extract the data and support it. And we even have embedded dashboards where we can show those type of metrics for them easily through our quality advisor. Some of these metrics are already being reported, but we can definitely assist with that. We can have project manage it and support with their infection prevention or their clinical team so that they can take their expertise and the clinicians and really target their activities, those expertise toward what they do best, right? Provide the clinical care. We can come in and provide that additional support if needed.
Got it.
Again, only if needed. It isn't necessary. That's why I always say we are here to support our members where they are in their journey. Our job is to make sure that they provide the best care, they have the best outcomes, and they're financially the most stable. And that's the vested interest of a GPO.
Yeah, but like I said, even the largest health systems don't always have the time or capability to extract that the risk share metric. So, is there an extra charge for that?
Yeah, there is some of our customers or our members actually have access to some of our tools like Quality Advisor, but others can absolutely purchase it and subscribe to it. It's an ongoing subscription. It's been around I am very familiar with these tools just because from service line perspective, it's a way to measure against your peers. It's a way to manage your service line quality metrics that are publicly reported, as well as, able to utilize that data to improve within your service line, right? It doesn't always have to be that you have to work on only those metrics that are there. So I have been familiar with what Quality Advisor type of tools for a long period of time, aside from supply chain. So that has been part of my service line or my, think of it as my career maturity or career journey as a clinician. We've always looked at registry data, quality data, comparing to our peers, looking for improvement, and dashboards for our quality metrics. So that's sort of where this comes from. And so having been embedded and having experts within, which we call customer success team in Premier, I usually include them in the creation of value-based contracting. And they come in and they can say that type of measurement is readily available. we can usually pull it out, even if it's in the electronic medical record system without our tools. Our tools make it easy because they have built-in dashboards and methodologies to extract that data and make it easy for leadership to evaluate that. But even without that, there's methodologies which you can extract that out of electronic medical record system and create baseline data to measure.
Yeah. The reason I'm keying in on that, Meena, is there's a lot of vendors that want to do this. It's just it falls apart because who's going to manage the data? So is that where a vendor can actually engage with Premier and say, hey, Meena, we're looking to do a value-based agreement where there's no one there to pull the data, there's no one there to manage it, but we can stand behind what we're claiming we can do. Can Premier help? And it sounds like that's a service that even from the vendor point of view, they can engage with Premier.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly what I've been asked to do. And I oversee value-based contracting program for all service lines, not just the ones that that I support from a strategic supplier engagement VP perspective for nursing and cardiovascular. I do work with the subject matter experts from each service line, and we pull in the appropriate teams. Again, that's the beauty of Premier, right? The diversity of expertise that we have, and being able to pull them in along with our suppliers and having that whiteboard sessions or brainstorming sessions to design it. We take our time designing them. These are time intensive and resource intensive as well. So we are willing to do it. And again, that's where the healthcare transformative component comes in from our GPO perspective.
Yeah. So how is that going? Because the reason I say that is on a risk share, it's been talked about for years and years. So I guess I'll phrase the question this way: if a vendor is willing to engage in a risk share, where we are now in healthcare as we sit here today, is that a key differentiator that will allow a vendor, the vendors that are willing to engage in risk share versus the vendors that don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole? Are the camp that is willing to engage in a risk share, are they setting themselves up for success? Is it a key differentiator now, or not necessarily?
I think it depends on the type of product and what we're talking about, right? So I think the data is important. Do they have the evidence to back it up? We don't want to set up anybody for failure. So suppliers may want to do it, but we could say that, there's just not enough evidence. And we do have, Premier does have an applied science department, which is, again, there's that firewall where it's very research oriented. We collectively work with our members and suppliers to help with research projects like that. So if you need additional evidence and testing methodologies, Mila Maloney is the VP of that program, and she is quite capable of working with suppliers and ensuring we can support in trying to test it out, right? And so the ones that you don't want any supplier to come on board is to try to create something that is not meaningful. So when I say we are vested interest in both suppliers as members, is that we're all in it together. We're collaborators. We are embedded in improving healthcare collectively. As a result, we want to ensure that the supplier credibility is not at risk either, right? So it's every party that's involved in value-based contracting should come out ahead. No one party should be left behind. So it isn't just to create. So we put a lot of due diligence and thought. We have a value-based contracting core team. There's a lot of subject matter experts that are there from legal perspective, from tools and data and measurement, as well as sourcing and clinical personnel that embody this team. And most importantly, we also take it to our academic innovator supply chain committee. Our member leaders, academic leaders, weigh in on the design of it. So we take pride in creating them. We want it to be a differentiator for everybody, even for members, right? Not all members are wanting to do it because there is that risk or there is that additional commitment. But again, I come from research. My initial job, we didn't talk about, is I was a researcher out of school in 94, 95. I was at Karmanos Cancer Institute, and we were doing initial research project around stage 4 breast cancer patients, where we did high dose chemotherapy and autologous bone marrow transplant. It's a very difficult journey, but you always have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
When we're talking about, transition to value-based care, these are difficult. These aren't bread and butter, transactional, typical supply chain negotiations. These are really extremely collaborative, working together, meaningful data, meaningful clinical practice, meaningful outcomes. It's a journey, right? We're not going to be perfect with our first one. We're not going to be getting there overnight. And we welcome any hospitals, suppliers that want to be part of this journey, so we can accelerate our adoption of value-based care, getting away from fee-for-service. So again, I don't think that we have all the answers, but we welcome the collaboration. We welcome the partnership from all angles, right? So, and we're invested in making it a success. And you say, is it going well? I think is the question you asked. We have 2,000 plus hospitals that are engaged in one or the other value-based contract that we have currently. And this is over the last 2 years. And although we have had COVID for the last year, we still were able to support our members that are interested in improving outcomes and designing, whether around member requests or as we see value, as we align with members' challenges and working with suppliers to fill that gap and the need.
That's incredible. So almost 50% of Premier's membership is engaged in one form of a value-based contract or another.
Yes.
That's incredible. I had no idea. I really thought it was, a very small percent just because it's so difficult to manage. So that's very exciting.
It is. And some of it is not so much, right? So again, we create different versions of value-based contracts. We play in 3 different types. One is, can you demonstrate hospital A or B that you're practicing an evidence-based and incorporate this evidence-based practice? If so, you get X% discount, right? And then that's one type, and that's where the most uptake is, followed by here is product A, incorporated with appropriate evidence-based clinical practice, demonstrate, and we will eliminate either 30 or 50% of associated infection, or will improve your outcome by X%. If not, there's a rebate associated with it, right? And then some of them, we tested it, and there has been reduction in harm to patients and maintaining it at 18 months with 0 infection rates in some of our members, right? And then there are those that are basically saying, we're going to do a little bit of more of a continuum of care. We're going to monitor readmission or infection over next 6 months or a year. Is that going to be, we believe that we can reduce that component of infection, pocket infection, or reduction in readmission by 50%. We monitor that as well. The most important thing is, I go back to this all the time. If you're not measuring, you don't know if you're improving. If we didn't measure and collaborate with both of our members as well as suppliers, we don't know that we're making a difference. There's some that work, there's some that don't, right? And that's why I think the lessons that we've learned from the first, what I call value-based contracting program 1.0 is, are we keeping track of the metrics? And what lessons have we learned? Is it necessary? Is it the most important thing that the member is looking for? Does it support their initiatives and their challenges? That's important, right? What do our customers need right now? And we are more engaged in supporting our customers as opposed to just being able to just put any product out there or any type of value-based contract out there.
Yeah. So, Meena, what if a vendor doesn't have evidence to support what they claim the product does, but intuitively you look at what they do, you look at maybe some evidence that doesn't really speak to their product, but a rational adult or clinician could look at it to say, you know what, this seems to make sense, even though there's no evidence directly to support it. It seems to make sense. Is there still an opportunity to enter into a risk share agreement in a situation like that?
I would caution against that. I would like it to be tested in a more of a controlled fashion, and that's the Premier Applied Science department where they can, or division, where they could work with the supplier. So we're not going to just leave you, because if we believe that there's that capability and opportunity, let's test it out in a more smaller group.
I see.
Otherwise, we may be setting everybody up for failure, right? So we don't want to do that. So don't want to put risk in such a way that we don't think we could measure it or we could replicate it. It has to be scaled and measurable, and we should be able to replicate the results. So from that perspective, maybe working with Premier Applied Sciences is the best approach that we can take, and have the supplier work and then show that. And then now we have evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
Now we can take it and really scale it and be able to go out there. And now we can see what those results are. So there's some, again, evidence behind what we're trying to say that there is. Again, keeping all of our credibility. I want to ensure that when we put these out, that Premier has done all the due diligence, that we are really serving our patients, our members, and our supplier partners.
Yes. So the word evidence has come up a lot during this talk so far. So when you say evidence, what specifically do you mean? And then how do you use evidence to quantify value?
So I think the most important thing with evidence is, of course, there's research, right? There's research articles. When I think about it, peer-reviewed journal articles are always at the top, followed all the way to white papers. So there's always that research component of element that's out there that's evidence. Another evidence that I always look at is there registry data that's out there? Is there anecdotal database of discharge data components that we could go back and retroactively look at to see, can we extrapolate the data out of there, which again is something that Premier has. So we have billion plus data points out there. Are we mining that data in a way that's meaningful, that you can say that certain actions lead to certain outcomes, right? So I think that's important. Because without that evidence, everything that I grew up, again, I go back to my journey, everything that I've learned from ACC, AHA, from heart and vascular was rounded around evidence. We were registry based. We looked at metrics. I think heart and vascular was one of the first ones from CMS asking for metrics around acute MI or heart failure. So I grew up with nothing but showing that evidence, making sure everything that we did is grounded in evidence, right? And guidelines. Aspirin is important. Beta blocker is important for mortality. Cardiac rehab is important. It's class 1 evidence. So everything that we do, we want the best that's out there to provide the best outcomes, right? If you have the evidence that shows the outcome. So why shouldn't it be with every procurement that we do, that we use evidence to say, is it the right product? Or are we just getting bells and whistles to keep the same outcome? There is no real outcome out there. And so I think it really guides all of us to go toward that path of innovating products and solutions that are not just, adding more cost, but really improving that total cost of care, right? I think that's the key. Some may cost more, but if in the long run it produces better outcomes, it is less expensive in all accounts, right? Because when you're talking about is value equals quality over price, if that's our metric, that's what we're driving towards. So evidence is crucial.
Yeah. And to me, that's a key, that you might have evidence that improves the long-term outcomes, but maybe a product is more expensive. So is there a methodology that Premier uses to say, one, yes, this evidence speaks to the clinical outcome, but how does the financial outcome get quantified when using evidence? Or is that kind of one of the bigger challenges?
I think that's the part of value-based contracting and value analysis, value-based contracting, right? Looking at it holistically outside of the transactional component. And I would say that Premier's value analysis book is reference guide is the most downloaded reference guide because it goes through that process. And it has even project management tools and everything in it that it walks, whether it's a supplier or a member, through the process with which you should look at it. There's, I always think about it. There's not just cost. Most importantly, is there evidence? Is there quality? Are there outcomes associated with it? Is it safe? Can we implement it safely? Can it reduce harm? Does it improve patient experience, right? Does it improve clinical utilization? Is it easy for our clinicians to take a look at it? A lot of times in this value analysis, one of the things that in the first step that we didn't incorporate is the clinician. Does it make their life better? Is it more efficient? Does it improve their experience as well, right? That's why I think it's about that quadruple: the patient, the clinician, the clinical outcome, then the cost. If all those are the three components are met, you in itself are creating value, and the cost will speak for itself. So
Yes.
those are the things that we need to take into account. And that's the beauty of our value analysis reference guide, is it walks through all of those steps. How should you incorporate it?
Got it. That's beautiful. That is just perfect. So, from the vendor point of view, what happens a lot is a product has strong evidence, they could speak to their clinical outcomes, but they're more expensive than another product, and that's where it dies. A lot of hospitals are not incorporating that quadruple outcome that you just so eloquently spoke to. It dies with, well, your product is more expensive with the others, so I just can't do it, even though the vendor knows and there's some clinicians know, wait a minute, this just makes sense, and it will, even from a cost perspective, save money over the long term. So my question, in those situations where it just dies on the vine because the SKU happens to be a little bit more expensive than the incumbent, who cares about the long-term outcomes and the long-term expense, generally speaking, at the hospital level? Because a lot of times vendors are dealing with materials management and supply chain, and some of those departments are fantastic and they totally get it. In the situation where they're not getting it, is it the CMO? Is it the CFO? Is it sometimes you have to rise above to someone who has that holistic thinking. Who is that?
I think it's all of them. I think it's the C-suite, it's the clinical leaders, it's the financial leaders, it's supply chain team, what I call the clinical transformation team, right? Performance improvement, all of those embedded collectively together going there. I also want to say we are on a journey, so everybody's getting caught up, right? So I think one of the best ways we can do is with consistently showing that and having those conversations, helping each and every hospital in maturing on that journey and supporting them in that way is the key. And I think that's where Premier is vested in it, right? We understand that not everybody's going to be able to look at it. And as there's been so many supply disruptions and competing priorities and unprecedented times, that maturity curve, it's not because of lack of wanting to do it. It is at this time, you're reacting to the current need. So as being said, that's why as suppliers and as a GPO, we are invested in ensuring that we can continue to show the true value of the product, right? But I'll actually ask this question, and I think you mentioned you wanted to talk about it. It's right. It's about what is one thing we could ask of vendors in return, right? Vendors have the SKU, they have the cost, they have something like that. I'll be like, well, what about if we asked about what could they show that could change the mind of the supply chain team? So I know you didn't ask me that question, but I'm going to say this. It's about transparency. It's about vendor transparency. And I'll break it down and I'll give an example of two things that, from my personal experience, I really think of very innovative transparency. As I said, as a clinician, as a heart and vascular clinician, when I first received a book from Cleveland Clinic from Dr. Toby Cosgrove, who is the former CEO, I was fascinated at the transparency of the data and the outcomes they did. They published it. Before CMS ever asked for metrics, they would publish their data. He believed that through measuring and transparency in metrics and being willing to look at yourself and that data and providing that transparency provided that trust, right, to the patient population. That was the first time I remember, oh my gosh, they're willing to go out there and put their data and their practice and their outcome data out there. That's one component of it. And second is I'm going to bring, that's way back when, right? And now I'm going to take it fast forward to today, the age of Google. One of my best friends bought me a pair of shoes from a company called Everlane when I started, because I was going to travel a lot with Premier, supposedly at that point. So she said, I'm going to buy you shoes that you can go and walk in and, you know, you're going to be running around the terminal. So here you go, I'm buying the shoes. I really found this great, great company. See, I am passionate about heart and vascular. I'm also passionate about clothes. So two things,
Yeah.
it's personal. On the other side, so when you go to everlane.com, it'll tell you the pricing transparency. It'll tell you the cost of the goods. It'll tell you the duties, the transport, the true pricing transparency is listed, their cost of manufacturing their products, and what their upcharge is. The day a supplier is willing to go out in that entirety of it, no one will pause and say, we understand why you're charging me that cost, right? That level of pricing transparency, when we talk about, you know, the interesting thing is hospitals are always asked to be transparent. Now we're also asked for pricing transparency, right? So as a former hospital person, I'm going to speak on behalf of the hospitals that are having to respond to reimbursement, being caught, having to respond to outcomes, are always liable for every single thing, right? So the payers and the vendors that are serving have not taken the burden off. The margins are shrinking, the costs are going up. We are invested in providing the best quality of care that's financially healthy, right? And how do we do that if our partners don't engage in those type of conversations? So I'm going to put it back to the vendor community. Which company is willing to come out here and share that level of pricing transparency, not just evidence transparency, right? We talked a lot about evidence. Let's go to pricing transparency. What makes you charge the hospital X? If they understand it, if our customers understand it, then we're all in it together, right? We all know we need to make an X% of income or money to pay for all of our jobs and everything else and benefits. So I was impressed by Everlane. So I'd say everlane.com. I mean, I'm not getting anything from it, but you just look up a product and just the breakdown of it is just absolutely innovative.
Yeah. So it sounds like really what you're looking for is someone to differentiate themselves, be truly transparent, be willing to share their evidence, be willing to track their evidence, be willing to hold themselves accountable. It's the full board. It's just be open, be honest. And then with that, if you truly have a positive impact, you'll be able to grow your business.
Absolutely.
Got it. Have you
I
had
think
it?
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Have you had a
Have
company
I had
willing?
it? Not the pricing transparency. Evidence, yes. Partnerships, absolutely. I think our intent is in the right place. I think we're all in it because we're all patients. From the time of conception, we're all receiving care in these hospitals, one way or the other. We just don't have to get sick to take care, get care. We have our routine checkups and everything, right? So I think if we're all in it, and if we all vested in it and we walk toward that mission, I think we get there.
Yeah. So I love your example with Everlane. Do you have an example within your Premier or Northwestern experience, excuse me, where a vendor just blew it out of the park? This is the model for how a vendor should approach a hospital, should approach a GPO, and it proved to be successful. Can you give kind of a best case scenario?
I think the best case scenario is those that are willing to embrace the change, right? I think the change from transactional relationship to moving toward the value analysis and the corporate functioning of supply chain, the methodology. You can no longer go to every physician within that expertise and keep selling at the door, bring products without, being vetted. and all of those components, those that are willing to embrace the change and be partners and support that, those were the ones that were the most successful in building those partnerships and relationships. They went away from, I need to sell it, but looked at the big picture and really looked at the healthcare shift, the paradigm shift, looked at, understood the challenges of the hospital or the health systems, and partner with them. I would say those were the ones that differentiated themselves. They didn't look at it as the price at the pump, you know, what can I get? They looked at the long-term strategy and said, how do we work with them, partner with them, bring our core expertise, and really try not to sell every single thing and be more meaningful in the way they dealt with the customer.
Got it. Meena, are there any resources that have been particularly helpful for you as you ascended in your journey to your position right now, that have been particularly helpful? Any books, any podcasts, any videos, any resources where, because you're at the top of the game, where for someone that wants to get to your level, any suggestions?
You know, I talked about mentors. I think the value of mentors is so key, right? I mean, one of the things that I would say, and this goes not just for those that are, you know, trying to grow within their journey, but it's also for leaders. I think I had the luxury of having some of the best leaders in my life and working for the best institutions along that looked at my potential, not necessarily my experience. Many of the times, I think I read a lot of Harvard Business Review research or various different things. A couple of the most recent books that I'm enjoying is Curiosity Inc. and Mindset. I think that blew me out of water, Fixed Mindset and Growth Mindset. That resonated well with me from a book's perspective. But for me, it was, I watched the leaders, right? I watched the leaders that pushed me out of my comfort zone. I'll go back to the two leaders that took me out of clinical, not took me out, but really pushed me out of my comfort zone. Actually, there are three individuals that I'll speak to, and if they hear it, I want to thank them. Dr. Peter Kerwin, Susan Campbell, Eric Conley, and Dr. Charlie Davidson. They looked at me for what I could bring. I never wanted to leave. I enjoyed taking care of patients. It was the best thing for me, right? So, but one of the things that they always said is, if you take care of the patient, you're only impacting those that you're providing care for. When you start building programs, you're going beyond that. You impact everybody that walks through that program or that entity, right? So always forced me to look at the impact besides just my pure individual gratification. He said that if the work is harder, however, the impact is far greater. So from that perspective, and additionally, when I went to go become a PA at Northwestern, what I was asked is, please don't. You know, you have a lot more that you've done along the way. You can be a great PA. So you could learn and grow and provide more impact. And I think that has really helped me become more confident in my capabilities, understanding that it's far greater to have transferable skills that you can take and build, no matter where you go. I used to say, I don't want a job. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Even Jennifer McFerrin or Gary Fennessy, when they asked me to come over to supply chain, basically said, Jennifer, you don't know what you're asking me to do. I don't understand this. I don't know anything about supply chain. Why would you want me to come? And she said, no, I just need your programmatic experience, right? So I think I've learned a lot about myself, what I like to do, as well as the importance of transferable skills. So it's continuous evolution. I have yet a lot more to learn. I'm learning tremendous amount about Premier and all of its capabilities. Again, I have the traditional view of what GPO was, but in the past few years, I've learned how much and how a GPO can really be transformative and accelerate the healthcare transformation and be the conduit in the industry. And I think our Susan DeVore, Mike Alcar, our leaders have shown that, taking a tremendous leadership role, working 24/7 to support the COVID-19 efforts through disaster response team and all of that. So I think we've done a great job. So I've had the luxury of having great people around me. So I say surround yourself, work for those that are always pushing you out of your comfort zone.
I love it.
Don't be comfortable. Don't be comfortable. If you're comfortable, you're limiting your potential and your growth. That's how I think about it. Not that I am always, but it's one of those things for me. It needs to be challenging. I need to learn. I need to grow. I need to make impact. That's simply how I look at it.
Perfect. I think we'll end it with that. Don't be comfortable. Keep pushing yourself, and you're the living embodiment of that. So, Meena, thank you so much. This was fantastic. There is so much to unpack and digest here, and this was just wonderful. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for the opportunity.
You got it. You got it.
That's a wrap for the first edition of the Demanding Value podcast. Wow, what a great way to start this out. I know I learned a ton from Meena. I hope you did too. Be sure to check us out for our next edition, and we'll talk to you soon.